Shalom. In this week's Parashat of Toldot, we have the dramatic story of the birth of Yaakov and Esav and of the competition between them. And one of the key verses says, "When the boys grew up, Esav became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp." And there is a famous midrash on that verse, which is found in Breshit Rabbah, chapter 63. And the boys grew up. Rabbi Pinchas said in Rabbi Levi's name, "They were like a myrtle and a wild rose bush growing side by side. When they attained to maturity, one yielded its fragrance and the other its thorns. So for 13 years both went to school and came home from school. After this age, one went to the house of study and the other to shrines of idolatry." In other words, according to this midrash, both of the children received the exact same education until at some point in their lives it became clear that they are very different from each other and perhaps should have received a different education. Now, this idea was reiterated in the 19th century by Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in his commentary on the verse. The deep difference between Abraham's grandsons, Esav and Yaakov, its main source was not just in their characters, but also in their deficient education. And he refers to Breshit Rabbah. As long as they were young, Isaac and Rivka did not pay attention to the difference in their hidden characteristics. They gave both of them the same Torah and the same education, and they forgot a great principle in education, Chanoch lanar al pi darko, teach a child in accordance with his way. One must adjust education according to his special path in the future, which fits his attributes. In other words, according to the Midrash and according to Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the mistake that Yitzchak and Rivka made was that they gave both boys the exact same education, even though both boys were very different from each other. Bimchilal Kvodam, with all due respect, I beg to differ with this interpretation. I believe that the pshat, the simple meaning of the text, is that Rivka and Yitzchak gave the boys two very different educations. Regarding Rivka and Yaakov, it says that Jacob was an ishtam, a mild man who stayed in camp. And that is why later on in the story, when Rivka wants Jacob to bring the meat to his father, she says, "Go to the flock and fetch me 2 choice kids." In other words, the ishtam, the man in the tent, he knows how to tend sheep. And later on in chapter 30, Jacob becomes wealthy as a shepherd. Similarly, Yitzchak brought Esav up as a hunter. It's said in our verse, "Behold, Esav was a hunter, an outdoorsman." And later on, what does Yitzchak say to Esav? "Now take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go to the field and hunt me some game." In other words, this is the way he had been brought up. And finally, in chapter 32, Esav meets Yaakov with 400 men, obviously 400 soldiers. In other words, from the very beginning, the parents saw that these 2 children were very different, and one was brought up as a shepherd, and the other was brought up as a hunter. Now let us return to the verse from Mishlei, from Proverbs, which Rabbi Hirsch quoted. A very famous verse, Chanoch lanar al pi darko, gam ki yazkin lo yasur mimena. The standard translation is, "Teach a child in the way he shall go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Professor Stephen Garfinkel of JTS published an article about this almost 30 years ago, and he maintained, and I agree with him, that that is not the proper translation. Rather, the verse should be translated, "Teach a child in accordance with his or her own way, and then when he grows older, he will not depart from that path." In other words, the verse from Mishlei is saying that the correct way to teach children is according to the path that is appropriate to that child. And so it is for a teacher or an educational institution. When we teach an adult or a child, we must teach them in the path that is appropriate for that particular person. And this is exactly what we've been trying to do at the Schechter Institute since 1984. We run a lot of different programs. Some of them are for adults, some of them are for teenagers, some of them are for young children, some of them are in Israel, some of them are in Ukraine. But the guiding light is Chanoch lanar al pi darko. We must teach each adult or each child according to the path that is appropriate for them. And that, I think, is the ideal in Jewish education. Shavua Tov from Schechter.